Hello, everyone. Welcome. I wanted to switch things up a little bit. Still talk about the transits and the astrology, obviously, but I wanted to talk about the Mars-Uranus cycle because I think the next Mars-Uranus conjunction in 2026 is going to be significant, but we are still in the midst of closing off the current Mars-Uranus cycle that started back around July of 2024. So I'm going to go through the conjunction, which usually kicks things off or initiates something, the opening square, which is, another event or another something that happens that creates more action or more call to action. And then I'm going to go over the Mars-Uranus opposition, where oppositions can be sometimes the hardest to balance. And then the closing square, which will be happening around the end of February, early March this year in 2026. So we're sort of like right on the cusp of finishing off. That closing square is sort of like any last minute call to action, last minute events. But I'm going to go over the conjunction, the opening square, the opposition, and then the closing square, which hasn't happened yet, from a US perspective, so a United States perspective. Major things in the news line or the news headlines that can kind of give you a feel for the possibilities with Mars-Uranus, right? Mars, we have the planet of desire and action, also the planet of war and conflict. And Uranus, the planet of rebellion, of innovation, sudden change. So there's an interesting combo when these two come together and initiate a story. So again, I'm going to go over sort of the major headlines or the major things that are playing out with the current Mars-Uranus cycle. I really invite all of you, though. I'm well aware that, I work with a lot of clients one-on-one from all over the world. I invite you to look at your country's headlines. What was going on in the news around the time points that I'm going to discuss in the intro? And then take those time points and listen to your rising sign, which will be time-stamped, and sort of reminisce, go back over these time points that I'm going to cover. What was going on? What was playing out? So that the end of February, early March, this might be sort of the closing action to the story that's been playing out for a lot of you since July of 2024. So this could be a good podcast episode to sort of mentally jot down those thoughts or dates, or literally write them down and sort of, go back to see what's playing out. So starting with July of 2024, I will say, again, this is not conclusive. There's many different things that could be playing into the cycle with your natal chart. And when I say, July of 2024, some of you might be able to think back to maybe June or August of 2024. So roughly when we're just something that I've noticed with larger planetary cycles that are playing out, it's a rough estimate. So some people get it really early, some people get it on the back end. So around July 2024, we have this Mars-Uranus conjunction. So the exact conjunction took place July 15th, 2024. Really kicking off sort of a new cycle, a new story between these two planets. Now, in the United States, on July 13th, I believe it was the 13th. So July 13th, 2024, this was the assassination attempt on Trump. And then shortly after that, Biden resigned from the presidential race, I believe within the same month. But again, just roughly around this time. But the assassination attempt was within days of the exact conjunction. So very, very fascinating. But again, check out the news headlines in your story or what else was going on around that time. There was a lot of conflict going on around this time. And so we have some really, really interesting things going on where, again, we have the planet that is involved in sudden things, revolution, rebellion, innovation, with the planet of war, of conflict. Mars also severs things. It likes to sever, it likes to cut. So when these two come together, there's certainly the opportunity for like the lower energetic expression of it, where it can be like an assassination. Or it could be sort of like the hyper stimulation of like innovation and rebellion. So we saw the not so great representation of that. Again, as an astrologer, I have to remain objective. I have to rise above opinion and judgment. So this is not to like get your opinions or your theories about it. This is really to just look at the planetary cycles, what they came up, what came up around that time, how it is sometimes even a direct representation of what these planets represent and what could play out, and then how to best prepare for it. So yeah. Then we go to the opening square, which was around June 2025. So let's hop, skip, and a jump to June 2025. I'm just going to get this more exact because some of you who are watching might see these transits and have a visceral knowing of what was going on or playing out for you. So again, July 2024, Mars-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. What was going on around that time that was really initiating, really popped off for a lot of you. And then this opening square is that sort of first initial point of stress or tension or the ability to take action around a particular issue, conflict, or just situation playing out. So the opening square was exact around June 14th, June 15th, but again, roughly around June 2025. This was the time in the United States when Melissa Hortman, the Minnesota state representative, I believe she was also a lawyer, and her husband were assassinated in their own home on June 14th, 2025. So literally the next assassination, which unfortunately was successful this time, in addition to her husband in their own home, it happened literally pretty much exact opening square, which is absolutely wild to me. So here we have like another major assassination in the headlines with the Mars-Uranus situation. Minnesota, man, Minnesota's been through the ringer lately. This was also around the time of those major Los Angeles protests, among a lot of other conflict really escalating in the world. So this was definitely sort of when we have these squares, they can be definitely a call to action, but there can be this really strong undercurrent of stress and tension. So this was a stressful, tense time where we had another really unfortunate event happen. And there were just a lot of protests. There was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of people taking action around a lot of things. So, again, around June 2025, that opening square, some of you might be able to think back to what action were you taking? What was playing out? Again, I'm going to go through each rising sign and sort of what Mars rules in your chart and how Mars was pulling in those themes or those areas of life for you to take action around. Then we get to the end of October, early November. I believe it was exact on November 2020, November 4th. I'm sure it was November 4th. Yeah, so November 4th. We'll go with November 4th. But again, if you're watching, some people like it to be exact by the minute. So November 4th exact, but again, a lot of you could have felt this early in October or later in November. This one is particularly interesting. This is the Mars-Uranus opposition, where this time Uranus was in Gemini. So this changed things a bit. So the opposition that took place between Mars and Uranus for the first time across this Sagittarius-Uranus axis. I think this was the initial sort of shift in particular themes that we could see and actually could start to see 2026 onward with Uranus being officially in Gemini. So this was also not too long after the Charlie Kirk assassination. It was not nearly as close as like a close enough opposition. So technically, if I'm going off of like data and degree points, no, I technically cannot include that. But it was still something that was very much in the headlines as to sort of who did it, what was happening, all the speculation, investigation, and such like that. But on, I believe it was November 4th, the actual day, this is when Mamdani was elected in New York City, which I know caused a lot of uproar in the news. It was either like you loved it or you completely hated it. And it was someone that was just very different from what we typically had as an elected individual. So again, like whether you're into it or not, just looking at it from an objective standpoint, I think it's just really, really fascinating. Especially because, the Gemini Sagittarius axis is very much about information. So this was, when you look at information, you look at media, you look at the news. I think this was a time where there was a lot coming up around that. But this was also in the midst of the longest government shutdown in US history. So again, a very tense time where the shutdown directly affected air travel. And I think it's interesting with Uranus, the Mars opposing Uranus around this time, end of October into November, where Uranus is now in an air sign. And we had so many problems with air travel, airlines around this time with the government shutdown. And it caused, a lot of conflict between people traveling for work, traveling for family, traveling for, you know, whatever it was. It was just a very, very oppositional time of people trying to balance something that they didn't have any control over because the government was shut down. And sort of waiting for it to reopen, waiting for it to figure itself out. And just how that first the Mars opposition with Uranus for the first time in Gemini that we're going to see more permanently, more permanently as Uranus makes its final ingress into Gemini for good. Few months from now in 2026, moving onward. So that this could be sort of that contextual clue point back around October, November of 2025, where the Mars-Uranus oppositions might start to impact information, media, knowledge, communication, airline travel, Uranus in an air sign, quite literally. So again, this could have been that contextual clue point, but I think because the opposition wasn't on the Scorpio-Taurus axis like it's been for the past however many years, this shifted things a little bit. I think this shifted sort of the themes that we might be moving into in 2026 onward with Mars and Uranus. Then we get to the end of February, early March. All right, bump this forward. So right about February 27th, 2026, right around that time. So some of us, when I'm posting this, mid-February, maybe, some of you might already be feeling this Mars-Uranus final square to Uranus that has backed up into Taurus. So again, the opposition took place with Uranus and Gemini, but it's going to finish the cycle with a now direct Uranus finishing its transit in Taurus. So this feels like a real closing square to me. We've had past Mars-Uranus squares where Uranus was in Taurus for roughly the past 7 years or so. But this is Uranus's final push through Taurus, where it won't return to Taurus for, 83, 84 years, maybe, something like that. So the fact that this is a closing square with Mars and Aquarius to Uranus officially closing out its transit in Taurus feels more finalized to me. So this will definitely be, I think, an interesting time in the news in terms of like final decisions, final actions being made, especially with what's been going on recently in the news. Again, pay attention to what's been going on in the news in your country. If there's been a lot of things that have come up, especially with the Mars-Pluto conjunction that's happened recently in this Aquarius area. But this Mars closing square to Uranus at 27 degrees, the end of February going into March, might be sort of like the closing arguments, the closing action, for better or worse, right? We don't know yet the exact details of what this will turn out to be, but this is definitely something to keep in the back of your mind in terms of what's been going on in your community, in your country, and how this closing square could help, or maybe not even help, but it could be just sort of the closing action to what is going on, hopefully for better and not for worse. Now, let's get into the rising signs. Hello, Aries Risings. So going back to around July 2024, again, some of you might have felt this in June or even deeper into July, early August. What was going on around that time? Particularly with this Mars-Uranus conjunction initiating this cycle in your Taurus second house of earned income and self-worth. So definitely maybe financial themes, financial budgets, material possessions, self-worth, really your value system as well. That Mars ruling your first house of the physical body, the self, how you take independent action. Some of you might have been really seeing things unfold that impacted you personally, impacted your physical body, your appearance, how you take independent action and move through the world. Mars also rules your other financial house, the Scorpio 8th house of investments, assets, debt, loans, partners' resources, if applicable, as well as any big transformational decisions or transformational work that might resonate for some of you as well. But I think, paying attention to financial themes, but also sort of your self-worth, its impact to your physical body, any of those themes that might have been playing into what was really unfolding around this time for some of you. Again, take what resonates, leave the rest. Then when we get to the opening square, which was June 2025, this could have been the point where maybe you were taking action, you felt some stress or some tension, or you needed to sort of change something to create a tangible change regarding sort of something going on with your physical body, and maybe looking at financial themes or big decisions, transformational work. Again, so what was sort of in this opening square really kicking off for some of you the action regarding what is playing out with that story? And then we get to the opposition, which was the end of October, early November. So again, roughly October, November, going the wrong way here if you're watching. So, but this time that Uranus was not in your Taurus second house of earned income. It was in your Gemini third house of communication, exchanging information. Some of you could have seen something playing out with siblings, extended family, short distance travel, and that the communication, technology, transportation themes could also be professional for some of you. But again, this opposition with Mars and Uranus, with Uranus now at that time in Gemini, this was in your travel houses. So I would want to see the data on Aries risings in the United States around October, November of 2025. And if there were more Aries risings that were impacted by the travel situation regarding the government shutdown in the United States, I would really like to see the data on that. Just because this opposition is literally in your travel houses as an Aries rising. So again, maybe some of you are really impacted by the government shutdown, or really impacted by communication delays, travel delays, or maybe there was, things playing out with siblings, extended family, your neighborhood or your community that was impacting you regarding the story that's playing out around this time. Then we get to the closing square, which at this point, when you're listening, is gearing up to pretty much happen. So some of you might already be feeling this, but the closing square is going to be exact, again, February 27th, 2026. So some of you could already be feeling the effects of this into February, maybe even into March for a lot of you. But this closing square, again, for some of you regarding what's been playing out since roughly June, July 2024, maybe even August for some of you. This closing square could be sort of that closing story. And again, this is also maybe for some of you playing into closing out this long journey with Uranus in your Taurus second house for roughly the past 7 years. So no more closing cycles with Uranus in the area of finance and self-worth for you, which for some of you could feel like a relief at this point. Especially with Mars ruling your physical body and your other financial house. So this could be sort of that closing action or closing, some of you, part of that action could be with Mars ruling that 8th house, could be decisions that you're not going back on, making big decisions, making big transformational decisions regarding finances, regarding what really supports you, supports your physical body, your ability to move through the world. So yeah, definitely pay attention to those financial themes. Or I think for Aries risings in particular, with Mars ruling this 8th house and your first house of self, you could personally be making decisions that you're not going to go back on to sort of create this closing square to close out this story before Uranus officially moves into your Gemini 3rd house for roughly the next 7 years. So again, keep an eye on this. Keep an eye on what sort of unfolding as you're listening to this, or what could potentially unfold that some of you could really be making those closing decisions or closing actions. The closing square tends to be typically, not always, but typically less volatile than the opening square, because the story's played out, it's in your consciousness, you've worked with it for a while, and the closing square is sort of like, all right, what's unfolded, what lessons, what has unfolded with this cycle, and now that you know this, now that you've worked with it for a while, what are those like last call to action happening? I will say for Aries risings in particular, whatever's happening the end of February, as you go into March, definitely pay attention to what is happening in February, because when Mars enters your Pisces 12th house, this could be a time where maybe you start to really have a lot on your mind. Mars going through the 12th, if you're prone to like insomnia, mental restlessness, there might be some sort of stuff going on behind the scenes for you going into March as this closing square starts to really take place. Hello, Taurus risings. So going back to July of 2024, roughly around July 2024, we have the Mars-Uranus conjunction that took place at 26 degrees in your Taurus first house of self, the physical body, how you take independent action. So some of you could have definitely seen sort of like another story playing out that affected you personally, affected sort of how you are internally feeling, affected your physical body. But more specifically, Mars rules your Aries 12th house of behind the scenes, hidden enemies. Now, I have a lot of theories on hidden enemies, viruses, mold, bacteria, all sorts of things can also be hidden enemies, things that that aren't visible to us. So it's not just people literally being hidden enemies, but also, other things that affected maybe your mental health or your thought patterns or your sleep. So, what was going on mentally, what was going on behind the scenes, that for some of you could have involved the other Mars ruled area, which is personal and or professional partnerships. So maybe some of you were seeing things sort of impacting your personal and professional partnerships, or you personally going through something within a particular partnership that was really maybe amplifying or, suddenly unfolding around this time. Again, take what resonates. But then we get to the opening square, which was June 2025. So around June 2025, we have the opening square where Mars did the opening square in your fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate. So maybe there was residual things or there was action being taken that was foundational to you or affected, home, family, property, real estate themes. So either way, this could have been the opening action point to what was really amplifying in the summer of 2024 for a lot of you. Then we get to the opposition. And again, this one is interesting because, again, the opposition was when Uranus was not in your Taurus first house. So this might have changed. This definitely could have been playing into the story that initiated back in, July of 2024 for a lot of you, or really just the summer of 2024. But with Uranus in that second house of earned income and self-worth, was there oppositional energy going on that now is bringing in financial themes? Did the government shutdown affect some of you financially as a Taurus rising? If you work in government positions, was this opposition directly really amplifying your financial houses and thus finances in your personal life? Or some of you maybe had a partner that worked. Mars rules the seventh house of personal and professional partnership, as well as marriage, if applicable to you. So maybe if you're married or partnered up, maybe your partner was, affected by the government shutdown around this time in the US. Either way, even if you're not in the US, this opposition either could have brought in financial themes and resources that were playing out with a partner, a business partnership, or just your own personal finances, self-worth, transformational work, transformational decisions playing a part in that story that's unfolded. That with Mars ruling this 12th house, maybe there was a little, mental stuff going on. Maybe there was some behind the scenes or maybe some mental thought patterns kind of playing into this or affecting you privately, affecting you mentally behind the scenes. Then the closing square in February 27th, I believe, is, again, this Mars closing square is between, Mars in your Aquarius 10th house of career, business, public recognition, in this closing square to this Uranus now retrograding back into your first house of self, really where Uranus is finishing that transit through your first house, where some of you might be really taking action or feeling the stress and tension to change something regarding your career, your business, your public recognition, or what fulfills you. Maybe some of you are taking action around something that feels more mentally supporting to you, or something that you want to sort of support yourself behind the scenes. Or some of you, this could involve business partnerships because Mars does rule the seventh house area of partnership. Or it could involve a personal partnership where there's action being taken to change something that has been playing out for some time, roughly since the summer of 2024. So again, Uranus is finishing this cycle, going through your first, and Mars is in this closing square where it will rejoin Uranus for a new cycle to unfold in your second house of earned income and self-worth, the summer of 2026. Hello, Gemini Risings. So going back to roughly around July 2024, with this Mars-Uranus conjunction at 26 degrees in your Taurus 12th house, what was going on behind the scenes? What was going on with your sleep, your mental thought patterns, Particularly, what was going on with those Mars-ruled areas that might have been affecting you behind the scenes, where Mars rules this sixth house of daily work and or health routine. So what was going on with your health? What was going on with work, coworkers, as well as the other Mars-ruled area, your 11th house of your long-term goals, your personal or professional social network. That might have been some themes that were really amplifying for you sort of behind the scenes, maybe in private, maybe mentally, internally. So again, going back to roughly around July 2024, what was really affecting you here that now has been playing out for some time? So again, going back to that opening square in June of 2025, we had the opening square with Mars. So was there an initial call to action, some stress or tension roughly around June of 2025 that maybe for some of you definitely could have been a work-related situation, a health-related situation, or just, what was maybe changing around your long-term goals, or what was changing involving your social network. Maybe some of you were taking action towards your long-term goals or towards the work that you want to do or the health that you want to feel. Then we get to the opposition. Now, the opposition was when Uranus was not in Taurus. It was in your Gemini first house of self and the physical body. So this opposition was really highlighting you versus the others in your life. So definitely personal and or professional partnerships, including marriage, if that's applicable to you. So there could have been this oppositional energy, this amplification of balancing your needs versus the needs of others. That definitely could have been business partnerships or coworkers, work-related. And for some of you with Mars ruling that sixth house of health as well, like maybe you were trying to balance like focusing on your physical body, focusing on your health versus maybe the health of a partner or the health of, the person you're married to, if applicable, or a business partnership. Either way, what was really amplifying that could have felt like you needed to be in two different places at once, or there was just this tug of war to really balance out what was amplifying around this time at this juncture in the story. Then we get to the closing square, which is exact around February 27th. And this closing square could definitely be sort of the last call to action regarding work, health, long-term goals, social network. But this call to action with Mars really applying to this closing square, with Uranus finishing its transit in this 12th house, could be growth and potential related. So some of you might be taking action or that last call to action regarding the story that's been playing out since roughly the summer of 2024. Taking action around the growth and potential themes that could be work related, health related, or just generally your long-term goals related. So again, as you're listening to this, some of you could already be feeling sort of the potential to take action on a work-related situation, something going on in your social network, your long-term goals that might be involving those growth and potential themes, which could be higher knowledge, publishing, teaching, travel, spirituality. That for some of you, those growth and potential themes could definitely be career-related. Hello, Cancer Risings. There is quite a bit for Cancer Risings in particular that could have come up with this Mars-Uranus conjunction, initiating a new cycle or theoretically a new story playing out. Because Mars rules your Aries 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So some of you might be able to think back to the summer of 2024, what was really initiating, what was really happening or coming up that for some of you could have involved your career, your business, your public recognition, or the things that bring you fulfillment. Where this Mars-Uranus conjunction was taking place in that 11th house of your social network and your long-term goals. So maybe there were some things that were coming up with friendships, groups, communities, long-term goals. But for some of you, it could also have been sort of career related, if that resonates. Mars also rules this 5th house. So the 5th house is the place of joy, but it can include, creativity, self-expression, artistry, romance, children, if applicable to you. So some of you could have really initiated a new cycle with children or planning for children. That could have maybe changed the way you look at your work, your career, sort of your public recognition. But some of you who are creative, very self-expressive in the work that you do, could have really initiated something new that was creative or innovative or part of something that you wanted to sort of cultivate or work on for the next couple years, initiating around the summer of 2024. And generally speaking, though, just, with Mars-Uranus conjunct at 26 degrees, around July of 2024, some of you could have really been seeing some things happening and unfolding within your friendships, your groups, your communities, and your long-term goals, just at a very basic level. Then we get to the opening square. So the opening square was around June 2025. And so this was the opening square where some of you maybe we're seeing the call to action or feeling maybe some tension or some stress regarding something that's played out that could have involved finances or self-worth. So some of you may have been taking action through financial matters, through material possessions, or just, your self-worth, with whatever is playing out around this time. Either way, it's the opening square. So sort of like, what was that tension or that stress, if it resonates, that might have been playing into what really initiated back in the summer of 2024. Then we get to the opposition. And the opposition is interesting because this is when Uranus was still in your Gemini 12th house, where it will make its final ingress into in the coming months and be there for roughly the next 7 years. But we got a little taste of this Mars-Uranus opposition with Uranus in your Gemini 12th house, which at this point in the story or cycle, you could have seen really that oppositional energy between your mind and body really being pulled in two different directions. Maybe there was a lot going on with work and routines or health and the need to be, alone or in solitude or rest, recharge, sleep. What was really coming up behind the scenes or mentally. So really, you could have really felt this oppositional energy and its impacts to sort of your mental or physical well-being, or your impacts to sort of, your need to rest and recharge, but also take care of the work and the daily grind, so to speak. Then we get to the closing square. And the closing square is around February 27th. And this, generally speaking, could be sort of that closing call to action, sort of that last minute change or last minute opportunities to create the tangible change that for some of you could be career, public recognition related, or it could be your creativity, your self-expression, romance if applicable, children if applicable, and how they're playing into sort of any innovation you want to make to your long-term goals, your long-term plans, your social network. That, again, the call to action could be financially related. So what's interesting for Cancer risings is the opening square was involving your income. So the income that's directly coming to you. The opening square was involved with this second house of earned income. The closing square, now in February, when most of you are listening to this, is involving other people's resources, partners' resources, if applicable, investments, asset, debt, loans, transformational decisions, transformational work. So the last minute sort of call to action or ability to create any tangible changes to what's been playing out for some of you since the summer of 2024, it's involving sort of the other financial area of your life, the long-term financial management, the long-term financial budgets, or resources that could potentially come up for Cancer risings in order to take that potential call to action to really close out this story involving Uranus finishing its transit in your 11th house of long-term goals, your social network, who you really want to surround yourselves with. That could be impacting these Mars-ruled areas such as your career, your business, your public recognition, or your 5th house of what really brings you joy. What is your heart's desire? Closing out in this cycle that you really want to initiate and focus on in 2026. Hello, Leo risings. So going back to the summer of 2024, roughly around July for a lot of you, Mars-Uranus conjunction, initiating that new cycle, or theoretically that new story that's been unfolding the past couple years at this point, where the Mars-Uranus conjunction at 26 degrees back around July of 2024 really landed in this 10th house of career, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment area of your chart. So again, very visible area of your chart. However, what's interesting about this is that even though this conjunction took place in your 10th house of career, Mars rules the opposite house, your 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So for some of you, even though it's in the 10th house, it could have involved something playing out at home, renovations, relocations, relationships with family, just people you live with, the situations coming up regarding any of those themes or themes within those themes. That could have also impacted your career. So, for example, as a Leo rising, I can apply my own personal account to this. This was a time where the summer of 2024 was a time where I got 2 puppies. They're brothers, twins. And although that is very adorable and glamorized and romanticized, it was very brutal. And the decision to get the second one happened suddenly. So that Uranian sort of element. And so this definitely shifted the household. This, training 2 puppies, and I take the training pretty seriously. So just, outside every 30 minutes to an hour, up in the middle of the night, taking them out, really trying to teach them very early on, outside, was brutal. And then where one is messing up, the other one kind of plays off of it. So it was a big mess for some time. And it impacted my business. It impacted my career. I could not I could not sit through one-on-one sessions or recordings without, a puppy screaming or peeing or pooping in the background. So it was definitely conflicting. It was definitely that Uranian element of complete and utter just sudden change. So we were also living in an area that wasn't the most compatible. I mean, it was technically dog friendly, but living on the 6th floor with 2 puppies and having to go down 6 floors, like taking an elevator, it's just not, it initiated a cycle in my marriage where we really had to contemplate where we lived. And it initiated that cycle of, we've outgrown where we've lived. This isn't compatible for where we're at currently and where we want to go in the future. So, and that impacted, with this happening in the 10th house of career. So some of you might be able to think back to, family situations or things playing out with home, family, property, real estate that could be impacting your career, or things just directly, like a literal translation of this, where things were directly playing out with your career. Now, Mars also rules this Aries 9th house of growth and potential. So some of you could have seen travel plans, continuing education, higher knowledge, publishing, teaching, really any growth and potential themes that could be playing into your professional life, your career, your public recognition, or the things that bring you fulfillment that could have come up around this time or been playing into that career area through the Mars ruled areas. So again, thinking back to around that time, what was really initiating. And then we move to June of 2025. Now, June of 2025 was the opening square. So this generally is the time where one takes action for change, creating tangible results, taking action on something. Maybe there was a time of a little bit of stress or tension with something that was playing out regarding you, maybe a career situation as well, that, could have impacted home life or your living situation or growth and potential, or vice versa. Living situations, home, family, property, real estate could have been impacting or been a source of change or action around this time, or continuing education, going back to school, travel, long distance travel, spirituality, truth, belief, publishing, teaching, if any of those growth and potential themes resonate, could have been playing a part or been integrated within the action being taken around this time. So again, going back to my story, this was actually the time that we decided to officially move out of the state of where we were living. So my husband actually got a new position, and that was located far away, like 1,600 miles away. And so this was a time where we took action to relocate to that area. So you can see the opening square was, the initial conjunction was like, okay, really created a situation that forced us to think about where we lived. Is this really compatible? Where do we need to go? Not only for long-term success, but having dogs, wanting space, wanting privacy. There's just a lot coming up personally in terms of us contemplating what is truly compatible with where we're at, and sort of how we lived prior was just no longer compatible. And then the opening square, again, the call to action, was literally the time where it was a change in job for him, relocated closer to that job. So for me, with Mars and other Leo risings, with Mars ruling that fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate, it was a direct action to that area. Now, for some of you, it could be a direct call to action regarding your education, travel. It could have been work-related, higher knowledge, spirituality, truth, belief. That could have been part of this opening square. Now, the opposition was October, November, roughly. But going into the first week of November, we had the Mars-Uranus opposition, but Uranus was in that Gemini 11th house. So that oppositional energy in October, November of maybe regarding your long-term goals. What was coming up regarding a long-term goal, your social network. Again, that could have involved those Mars-ruled area regarding home, family, property, and real estate. So some of you could have seen sort of that oppositional effect around relationships with family, relationships, with people you live with, relocations, renovations, and sort of looking at who you surround yourselves with, those long-term goals. Where is the balance needed? Mars also ruling this Aries 9th house of growth and potential. With it being in the 5th house, I think for a lot of Leo risings around October, November, what could have come up was the contemplation of joy. What feels good for you around your family, your living situation, your overall growth and potential, and sort of having to deal with this oppositional energy to balance that out. So to give you an example, around this time, we decided to go back to around the area of where we used to live, because we have a lot of family there and we want to see them. We want to be around them. So this was the time where, approaching the holidays, things maybe slowed down and we could spend a significant portion of time in that area. So we both work virtually, so we decided to go back to that area and spend, a month or two back around where we used to live to just see family, be with family, et cetera, because at the end of the day, like, that area still feels like home to us. And when we packed up and we went back to that area, we faced some major issues. That was definitely that oppositional energy, for me at least, around, oh, I thought this could be part of the long-term picture, and now I don't think it is going to be part of the long-term picture, because there were, issues with where we were living or where we were going to stay, that came up. So it wasn't directly, relationships with family. I mean, it impacted our desire to attend to our relationships with family, but it was more property and real estate related and sort of that oppositional tug of war. So again, some of you could have seen sort of family issues or property real estate issues, or it could have been more of the ninth house sort of continuing education, career related, travel, knowledge, and sort of that oppositional tug of war of like, okay, well, based off of what's coming up, how do I innovate or change my long-term goals based off of what's happening at this juncture in the story to sort of balance that oppositional energy that could have been really challenging for a lot of you around this time. Now we're getting to the closing square as we get deeper into February, particularly February 27th, where Mars in your Aquarius 7th house at 27 degrees will square Uranus at 27 degrees. So this will be the closing square. Again, what is that last call to action around home, family, property, real estate themes? What is the call to action around any last minute growth and potential themes that could be career related for some of you, that might have you focusing on this personal and or professional partnership area of your lives? So some of you might be dealing with something within your personal or professional partnerships, or changing a plan of action within that area to help accommodate the action or call to action regarding this closing square. That for some of you could directly be it could be directly related to any last minute innovation or change some of you want to make to career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So again, for me, with what's transpired, I'm definitely looking at what could come up with my husband in this picture that might play into the overall plan of action, and how I might be heavily contemplating, our living situation, family, home themes, as well as my overall growth and potential that definitely could impact my business, public recognition, or what brings me fulfillment, and sort of having to not only balance that, but be able to take that last sort of call to action. Now, the opening square involved you, right? So think back to around June of 2025. That opening square, Mars was in your first house of self, physical body. So a lot of you could have felt that extra oomph to get out of a situation, to take action, to move towards something that felt more aligned to your overall desires, motivation, and plan of action. Now on the flip side, on the closing square, this Mars is in the area of partnership. So some of you might be taking action to create more aligned situations regarding a business partnership, or align certain situations that might be playing out within your marriage, or align just to generally those long-term partnerships that could absolutely help create tangible results towards your overall growth and potential that could be career related, and or your overall core motivations and desires that feel more aligned, that could also, like I mentioned, create tangible results to this fourth house of home, family, property, real estate themes. Hi, Virgo Risings. The Mars-Uranus conjunction at 26 degrees that took place in your Taurus 9th house, going back to roughly around July of 2024, really kicked off a new cycle in this 9th house of growth and potential. So some of you could have seen it playing out regarding themes like continuing education, higher knowledge, travel plans, publishing, teaching. For some of you, this could have been a career-related matter as well. So definitely kicking off a new cycle in the area of those growth and potential themes, or whatever growth and potential means to you in this cycle, in this story. Now, Mars rules your Aries 8th house, which is a financial house, but think long-term finances like investments, assets, debt, loans, partners' resources, if applicable, big transformational decisions, transformational work that could have been impacting or playing a part in continuing education, in and maybe investing in your education, investing in travel plans, investing in your overall growth and potential, which could be, career related for some of you. Mars also rules the Scorpio 3rd house of communication, exchanging information, technology, which could have been professionally related for some of you as well. That could have been kicking off a new story or new cycle playing out regarding growth and potential themes. This 3rd house is also siblings, extended family, short distance travel. that could have been playing into this new cycle. So again, thinking back to the summer of 2024, what was really going on, maybe financially, maybe with communication, that could have been personal or professional, that could be playing into those overall growth and potential themes that could have been career related. Then we get to the opening square in June of 2025. So thinking about, early summer of 2025, what was really happening? What action was playing out? Now for you, this Mars creating this opening square was in your 12th house. So that action could have been mental. It could have been behind the scenes. It could have been more private, less visible. And so some of you might have been taking action or feeling a little stress or tension regarding something playing out, or maybe some of you were untangling some thoughts or information, or even with Mars ruling this 8th house, untangling some financial situations, or maybe looking into investments, assets, resources, or transformational work sort of behind the scenes. That again could have really been playing into being able to innovate your overall growth and potential and sort of where you want to go with those growth and potential themes. Then the opposition. This opposition is interesting for Virgo risings because I think it could give some contextual clues as to what 2026 onward might look like, where as we got into the first week of November in 2025, we really had this Mars-Uranus opposition, but this time Uranus was in your Gemini 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment, with this Mars in your 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So maybe some of you were thinking about like your living situation, relationships with family, again, property, real estate, renovations, relocations, and sort of maybe contemplating how that might be playing into the overall story. But with Mars ruling this Aries 8th house, some of you could have been dealing with that oppositional energy around, the financial matters that might be playing into the story at this point, or maybe even the long-term financial matters that might be playing into the home, family, property, real estate situation. Either way, Mars still rules the Scorpio 3rd house. So some of you could have really been feeling that oppositional energy around, communication, exchanging information, what's going on in your everyday environment, and having to balance that with what might be playing out with career, business, public recognition. So for Virgo risings in particular, just because this opposition happened in angular houses, that has the ability to sort of give some contextual clues as to what could come 2026 moving forward, because Uranus is going to make the final ingress into your Gemini 10th house of career, business, and public recognition in just a few months now that we're listening to this in February of 2026. So right around the corner, where Uranus is going to be here for roughly the next 7 years. And so every Mars cycle, roughly for the next 6 or 7 years, off the top of my head, is going to involve Uranus in your 10th house. So some of you could definitely feel that oppositional energy of a living situation, a relocation, relationships with family, again, home, family, property, real estate themes, 2026 moving forward, because every time Mars goes through Sagittarius for roughly the next, 5 to 7 years, it's going to oppose Uranus at some point in this 10th house. So some of you might be able to think back to October, November of 2025. What was really coming up between career or the home and family sector of your lives that could be setting the tone for what's to come for some of you? Again, take what resonates, leave the rest. And then we get to current time, where February 27th, Mars is going to officially form the closing square to Uranus in that Taurus 9th house. This time, Mars is going to be at 27 degrees in your Aquarius 6th house of daily work and or health routines. So the call to action could be a health situation, a work situation, something that is shifting your routines or sort of your daily grind, as I like to call it. That could be innovating or changing sort of the growth and potential area of your life that, again, could be career related. So what I want to point out is that the opening square took place in this 12th house back around June of 2025, which was more, the 12th house is more hidden. It's more, it's like your subconscious thought patterns, stuff that's privately going on behind the scenes. And so this could have, the 12th house is also hidden enemies, and hidden enemies isn't always a person. It's a virus, it's a bacteria, it's cancer, it's things that are just lurking that affect your health, affect your mental, physical health, affect your work. And so what's interesting about this is, like, just a side note story. I know someone who went through the opening square as a Virgo rising, and the opening square was a time where they found out they had a severe illness. And so this really, and it was really out of the, like, really unexpected. And so the closing square is now the time where they are gearing up to take care of it through, like, really intense treatment, really intense surgery, post-treatment. So it's interesting how, like, hidden enemies aren't always people. Is something that I've learned over the years, especially with one-on-ones. So if that was the case where it's like maybe some of you were struggling with an illness or something came up that was kind of unexpected, that you realize was affecting your work, your health, your overall vitality, this closing square could be really the last call to action to take care of, like, a health matter once and for all. If it's more work related, growth and potential related, or even like financial related with Mars ruling the 8th house, some of you could be taking that last call to action to maybe look at a financial situation, look at your investments, how your work is supporting that, how some of you could be making some last minute changes to your overall routines to support the work, support your overall health and vitality. It doesn't always have to be a hidden enemy, but it could just be, you going to 2026 feeling like I want to step into a new level of vitality. I want to feel good. I want to feel overall wellness, and using that as the call to action to really support any last minute innovation towards the 9th house of overall growth and potential, which could open up more opportunities for travel, for knowledge, spirituality, that for some of you, again, could be career related. Hi, Libra Risings. This Mars-Uranus conjunction at 26 degrees back around July of 2024 landed at 26 degrees in your Taurus 8th house. Now, this is really the area of those long-term financial themes. So think investments, assets, debt, loans, partners' resources, if applicable, especially if you are partnered, if you are married, because Mars in this conjunction, initiating this new cycle, literally rules your 7th house of personal and professional partnership, including marriage. So business partnerships, marriage, long-term partnerships that involve finances are definitely some areas to contemplate or think about regarding what could have really come up in the summer of 2024 that could have played out in the past couple years that is now just getting to a point of maybe starting to finish with that closing square, which I'll get to, that's happening February, March of 2026. Now, sticking to this Mars-Uranus conjunction, what was going on back around the summer of 2024 that could have involved personal and or professional partnerships, including marriage, but Mars rules your other financial house, which is the second house of earned income, self-worth. So some of you could have seen really strong financial themes come up, or this could have involved big decisions, self-worth within your connections with others. Some of you could really have seen storylines sort of unfold with resources, other people's resources. Regardless, I think this has pretty strong financial themes and or partnership themes that could have really come up, that could have involved transformational work or big transformational decisions. Now getting to the opening square. The opening square was around June of 2025, where Mars was forming the opening square in your Leo 11th house of friends, groups, communities, and long-term goals. So some of you could have been taking action due to long-term goals, due to something playing out within your personal or professional social network that could have been involved in this cycle or in this storyline. So again, think back to, around June 2025, early summer, where some of you could still see sort of action around, financial themes, financial discussion, financial decisions that could have involved personal or professional partnerships, something playing out within a partnership. Either way, even if you're not partnered up, this has very strong financial themes that I think a lot of Libra risings might have been working out or taking action on, or even with the opening square had a little bit of stress or tension trying to sort of align. Then we get to the opposition. And the opposition is interesting because we had Uranus in your Gemini 9th house at the time of this opposition, right around the end of October, beginning of November. So, roughly around October, November, generally speaking, some of you could have felt that oppositional energy building between your 9th and your 3rd. So there's a lot on the table with the 9th and the 3rd. So if you teach, if you're into teaching, publishing, traveling, spirituality, especially if it's career related, this could have brought up some oppositional effects for you. But again, Mars rules your earned income and self-worth, but it also rules this area of partnership or the partnership you want to attract. And those themes could have been integrated in this oppositional energy. Now, what's interesting for Libra risings as well as Aries risings, the Mars-Uranus opposition was happening in travel houses. So if you were traveling around this time or trying to create travel plans, especially in the United States with the government shutdown, this probably impacted you more as a Libra rising or Aries rising. So it could have been as mundane as that. So some of you could have been taking care of appointments, errands, tasks, phone calls regarding, personal or professional partnerships, regarding financial matters, that could have also been playing out here. But this oppositional energy with Uranus in Gemini could have been giving you some contextual clues as to what the oppositions with Mars and Uranus in your Gemini 9th house might be like 2026 moving onward. So just a few months into 2026, I believe April of 2026, Uranus is going to make its final ingress into this Gemini 9th house for roughly the next 7 years. So every time Mars goes conjunct, squares, opposes, it's going to be with this Uranus in the 9th house. So this could have given a little taste, a little contextual clue back around October, November as to sort of what that oppositional energy or the really, oppositions can be really hard to balance, really hard to navigate. So there could have been a lot going on just in your immediate everyday environment versus, what's going on with the bigger picture, the overall growth and potential, sort of the overall innovation and change you want to focus on, that for some of you could be career related, that you're really gearing up for. Then we get to the closing square, which is February 27th. So, as you're listening to this, some of you could already be feeling that applying square to Uranus, where the closing square is really the last call to action, so to speak. So what last minute call of action, last minute change some of you might be making regarding something playing out within your marriage, something playing out with personal or professional partnerships, the connections you do want to make, any last minute change or call to action that could be financially related to innovate your long-term financial future or transformational decisions. Either way, this Mars at 27 degrees square Uranus is in your 5th house of joy. So whatever call to action I think a lot of Libra risings are maybe taking, or the stress and tension they might be feeling as they get deeper into February, the action might be due to the desire to align to more joy, more creativity, more self-expression, regarding your finances, regarding your financial future, regarding anything playing out with personal and or professional partnerships, including marriage for some of you. Hello, Scorpio risings. So this Mars-Uranus conjunction initiating the new cycle that took place back around July of 2024 was at 26 degrees in your Taurus 7th house of personal and or professional partnerships, including marriage, if applicable to you, or the connections you do want to make. So this conjunction, or the initiation of this cycle, was definitely taking place in your connections with others, your long-term partnerships, marriage, but more specifically, this Mars rules your Aries 6th house of daily work and or health routines. So some of you might have seen like work, health, routines sort of come into the picture, the work that you really do desire, the work that you really do want to do, and how that's playing a part in your partnership or your connections with others. Now, Mars rules your 1st house of self, the physical body, how you take independent action. So there could have been situations or storylines starting to play out around this time where you were contemplating your specific, your individual desires, motivations that support you, support your independent action, maybe support the work that you want to do, and what partnerships or connections support that. So there's a lot on the table, but again, think back to what desires or motivation or plan of action was really amplifying or starting to play out or come into focus in your personal and or professional partnerships, including marriage. Now, the opening square took place in June of 2025, where the opening square was Mars in your Leo 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So some of you could have definitely been taking action regarding the situation that really initiated or came into focus back around the summer of 2024. But some of you could have seen it play out regarding your career, your business, your public recognition, or the things that bring you fulfillment, and sort of that being the arena in which you're taking action regarding the situation play out. Either way, Mars does rule your 6th house of health, work, routines, as well as your 1st house of self. So some of you could have been taking action regarding a work situation, or a health situation, changing routines, changing what feels more aligned to you, or maybe getting a little bit more clear on that. Then we get to the opposition. Now, the opposition took place in your financial houses, or pretty much predominantly financial houses, where Uranus wasn't in this Taurus 7th house of partnership. It was in your Gemini 8th house of investments, assets, debt, loans, partners' resources, if applicable, transformational decisions, transformational work, but predominantly a financial house, where Mars in your second house of earned income and self-worth was in opposition to Uranus at this juncture in the cycle or story. So again, what was that oppositional energy in October, November that some of you could have felt around, work, health, routines, your physical body, that may have had financial themes integrated within them, or just that tug of war, that oppositional energy of feeling like you have to be in two places at once, or just being, oppositional energy. I think with Mars for Scorpio risings could be challenging because Mars rules your physical body. So some of you could have felt that, around November, just the desire for something, the increase of something, that could have had direct impacts to you. But generally speaking, this opposition could have given you contextual clues as to what Uranus and Gemini will be like 2026 onward for roughly the next 7 years in relation to Mars, right? Because in 2026, just a few months from now when I'm recording this in January, Uranus is going to make its final ingress into your Gemini 8th house. And so every time Mars squares, opposes, really any aspect, it will be to a Uranus in Gemini, not a Uranus in Taurus anymore. So this oppositional energy could have brought something into focus that could give you those contextual clues around finances, big decisions, transformational work even, that could be sort of playing a role in sort of the motivations or the plan of action around your work, your health, your routines, and your physical body. Then we get to the closing square. Now, the closing square is interesting because, well, it's a closing square. So it's really the closer to that cycle that initiated back around the summer, or not, it's not summer for everyone. I always forget that, but roughly around July of 2024, whether it was summer or winter for you in the world. And this closing square could be that last call to action around something regarding your physical body, your health, your work, your routines. That could also involve some last minute innovation or change to something within a partnership, whether it's personal or professional. And the Mars is going to square Uranus in your Aquarius 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So some of you might see it sort of playing out regarding home, family, property, real estate themes as to something foundationally that maybe is playing a part with your work, your health, your routines, your physical body, and sort of playing a part in this last call to action for some of you if it resonates. Now, want to point out that the opening square back in June of 2025, or around June of 2025, was involving your 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So the opening square was involving a much more visible area of your chart, and thus lives. And then now the closing square is involving the roots of your chart, the foundation of your chart. So it's sort of like the opening square was very visible, maybe involving your work, your career, maybe changes to that, contemplating what are your true motivations and desires and long-term action. And now some of you might be sort of coming back down to your roots, coming back to the foundation of your lives and what really is going to support that plan of action, the long-term goals around the health, the work, the routines, and what ultimately is going to support your physical body and ability to take action towards the life you want, Scorpio risings. Hello, Sagittarius risings. So going back to roughly around July of 2024, Mars and Uranus joined at 26 degrees in your Taurus 6th house of daily work and or health routines. So some of you could have seen a new cycle, a new storyline start to sort of come into your consciousness or start to play out that could have directly impacted the work you want to do, health themes, overall routines. Now, more specifically, Mars rules your Aries 5th house. This is the place of joy. So this could have involved your children, if applicable to you, dating. So if you were dating, if that's applicable to you, this could have sort of played into the story unfolding or starting to unfold around this time. But Mars also rules your creativity, artistry, self-expression. So if your work or your daily work and routines involve artistry, creativity, self-expression, this could have definitely brought up those themes. Now, if you know your chart and your IC is in your Aries 5th house, this probably had more to do with its impacts to home, family, property, real estate. So I just want to point that out and try to include as many people as possible. So back around July of 2024, what new stories or sort of things that were initiating around things impacting your work, your health, your routines could have been home, family, property, real estate related. If you have children, definitely involved with that. That could have been playing out for the past couple of years. But generally just like what brings you joy, what was coming up around your heart's desire, creativity, self-expression, etc. Now, when we get to the opening square was around June of 2025, after that gnarly Mars retrograde. The opening square with Mars in your Leo 9th house of growth and potential is interesting because, again, Mars rules your Aries 5th house, which could have involved children, romance, creativity, self-expression, home, family, property, real estate for some of you. But Mars also rules this 12th house, which is behind the scenes. Maybe what you were mentally thinking about, mentally untangling, mental thought patterns, sleep, solitude. Mars also rules the 12th house of hidden enemies, which isn't always people. You know, it's not always like coworkers or people you work with regarding the opposite house of your 6th house of work. Hidden enemies could also be like things that affect your health, like viruses, bacteria, molds. So some of you could have been dealing with that if like a health situation was something that you were dealing with. But if not, this opening square was that initial call to action. And because Mars was in your Leo 9th house, some of you could have been doing that call to action to create tangible change, but in a way where some of you might have been changing growth and potential themes. Maybe some of you were trying to align to overall growth and potential that with Mars ruling your 5th house brought you more joy, brought you more time with your children, brought you more time for creativity, self-expression, travel, knowledge, spirituality. But with Mars also ruling the 12th house, maybe a call to action to change some things, innovate your routines, your work, your health, so that you have more time for solitude, more time for sleep, being able to balance the mind and the body, the physical and mental health as well. The opposition, which happened around October, November, was interesting because Uranus was out of that Taurus 6th house of daily work and or health routines. So this was across your 1st and 7th house axis, which is angular. So some of you could have seen, you know, that oppositional energy of trying to balance sort of your needs versus the needs of others with whatever was really coming up around this time, which could have been, you know, home, family, property, real estate related, trying to balance your needs versus the needs of others regarding children, if applicable, you know, what was going on behind the scenes. So the Mars opposition across your first and seventh, this could have given you some contextual clues as to what Uranus and Gemini will be like in relation to Mars 2026 moving forward for roughly the next 5 to 7 years. So this oppositional energy could have brought into focus the need to balance something regarding those fifth house themes or 12th house themes, you know, regarding behind the scenes stuff, what was playing out, balancing your needs versus the needs of others. That could have really been highlighted around this time. Now, the closing square is going to be in your Aquarius third house. So the closing square around February 27th, where Mars will be at 27 degrees in your Aquarius third house, could involve third house themes such as communication, technology, transportation, especially if you work in those fields, or it could involve just your neighborhood, your community, relationships with siblings, extended family, where those themes are coming into maybe some action some of you are taking around those Aries fifth house themes, which could be home, family, property, real estate related if your IC is here, or taking action around something playing out with your children, impacting your children if applicable. Again, something impacting, you know, your creativity or self-expression, what brings you joy. So this last square to Uranus in your sixth, it could also indicate, you know, maybe switching some things around your everyday environment and who's in your everyday environment that can help support you take action around whatever's going on mentally, whatever's going on behind the scenes, whatever's going on in your everyday environment. Again, those people, places, and things within your everyday environment that might be helping you take action on something that you need regarding work, regarding health, or just your overall routines. So some of you, this could just be a very everyday mundane level of like who's in your corner to support you and take action around maybe getting more sleep, more solitude, more rest, to take some innovation and change to the overall health and routine area. Or for some of you, this could be, you know, work related, especially if you work in communication fields, technology, transportation, short distance travel. Some of you could be taking sort of the closing action to close out any innovation and change you want to make to your routines that really support your overall health and work. Hi, Capricorn Risings. So this Mars-Uranus conjunction at 26 degrees that took place back around July of 2024 landed in your Taurus fifth house of joy. So lots on the table to kind of break down here, because the fifth house is the place of joy, but it's also creativity, self-expression. So if you're a creative, an artist, someone who has self-expression, you know, deeply integrated in your everyday life, definitely pay attention to those themes as I'm going through this. Now, the fifth house is also the place of children. So if you have children, you were family planning, any of those themes that, you know, came up or have been playing out the past couple years, you know, definitely pay attention to that as I'm going through this. And then lastly, if you know your chart and your IC is in your Taurus fifth house, this could have very strong impacts to home, family, property, real estate. If that IC is in your Taurus fifth house. But even if it's not, and even if you don't know your birth chart, Mars rules your fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate. So this could still be a story that's been playing out the past couple years regarding, what you really desire, your core motivations, what's really been impacting your home, family, property, real estate, and playing out the past couple years for some of you. Now, Mars also rules this 11th house of friends, groups, communities, and long-term goals. So for some of you, it could have been a story playing out regarding your friendships, groups, communities, and long-term goals that may have gone through some things, may have been a source of action or innovation over the past couple years. Now, when we got to the opening square back in June of 2025, after a very gnarly Mars retrograde, the opening square that Mars made to Uranus, initiating that cycle back around in July of 2024, that now created a potential call to action around June of 2025 regarding maybe a home, family, property, real estate situation, or regarding something about your personal or professional social network, your long-term goals, that could have had you looking at partners' resources if applicable, or those long-term financial resources or management. So investments, assets, debt, loans, resources, transformational decisions, transformational work that could have been playing into the story unfolding at this point. Now, when we got to the oppositional situation back in October, November of 2025, this one was a little different because Uranus was still in your Gemini 6th house of daily work and or health routines. So that oppositional energy, which could have felt very challenging, very difficult, especially across the 6th and the 12th house axis for you Capricorn risings, because this is really what I like to call the mind-body axis. How are you balancing your mental and physical health? How are you balancing your sleep with your daily grind and your work and coworkers, etc.? So this could have brought up the story unfolding, but in a way where it could have really tested and challenged your need for rest and recharge versus what you had to do work-wise, what you had to deal with health-wise, or just daily grind routine, situations coming up around this time. But it could have also provided some contextual clues as to what Uranus and Gemini will be like in reference to Mars. So not in totality of what Uranus and Gemini will be like, but what Uranus and Gemini will be like in relation to Mars. So the opposition to Uranus and Gemini, with Mars ruling your 11th house and your 4th house, like some of you could have really been trying to balance, something going on foundationally, something going on with home, family, property, and real estate that may have really taxed you, may have really tested, where you needed to rest and recharge, but also take care of a family situation or, a property, a renovation, a relocation. Or with Mars ruling this 11th house too, some of you could have really been trying to balance your physical and or mental health or a work situation or just things coming up in your routine where something could have really been playing out within your personal or professional social network, your long-term goals. Maybe your work involves goals and you're really trying to balance the goals or balance the home life or, and you could have just been really tested and challenged there. Then we get to the closing square. And this closing square is interesting for Capricorn risings because the closing square is at 27 degrees in your Aquarius 2nd house of earned income and self-worth. So the closing square could involve taking action to create tangible results regarding your money, your earned income, your self-worth. So some of you could be taking action regarding a financial matter that is really your immediate income. That could be long-term goal related. It could be home, family, property, real estate related, or you could be taking action regarding something with the foundation of your lives, your overall goals, dreams, aspirations, to make those last minute changes to the innovation and change you want to make to maybe align yourself to something that feels more joyful. That could involve creativity. It could involve children if applicable. So whatever it is, as you get into February, some of you could already kind of be feeling this as you get into February of 2026, going into March, where you could be gearing up to take action to maybe change long-term goals, want to align yourselves to something that feels more motivating or aligns to your desires regarding your social network, your long-term goals. But I think some of you could be taking action regarding finances and how it's ultimately supporting the foundation of your lives, supporting the foundation you need, supporting the foundation that supports your finances, your self-worth, and how that can ultimately create consequences to the innovation and change maybe some of you are wanting to align yourselves to that feels more joyful, more self-expressive even, especially if you're a creative or any of those themes around this time. So again, overall, I think I would definitely pay attention to the Mars-Uranus square at this time in February and March because Mars rules this fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate. When we get to April of 2026, you're going to have so much happening in this fourth house, with Mars initiating new cycles with Neptune and Saturn, other personal planets also creating new cycles in this area. So this closing square for some of you might be the time to not only take action, but it could be setting the stage for what is really initiating in this fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate as you get into April, May of 2026. Hi, Aquarius Risings. This Mars-Uranus conjunction at 26 degrees that happened back around July of 2024. So again, some of you might have felt this earlier in June, deeper into July. Regardless, think back to around this time, what was really happening? This conjunction or this new cycle starting with Mars and Uranus landed in your Taurus fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate. So some of you could have seen the story starting to come into focus or even affect the area of home, family, property, and real estate. Now, more specifically, Mars rules the opposite area, which is your 10th house of career, business, public recognition. So some of you could have been starting even new cycles with projects, career, public recognition, what brings you fulfillment, even though this conjunction or cycle was initiating in the fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate. Now, Mars also rules this Aries third house of communication, exchanging information, technology, transportation, which could be personal, but also professional. So if you work in communication fields or with technology or transportation or exchanging information, this could have also been sort of coming to fruition or coming into consciousness around this time with this cycle. What's interesting about this is I've noticed with this cycle, not obviously all Aquarius risings, but I've noticed an uptick of Aquarius risings working from home or like initiating businesses or side businesses with working from home. So like some Aquarius risings, I've literally seen a direct translation of Mars ruling this 10th house of career and third house of communication and technology, where they're like, okay, I'm going to innovate and, start a new business or start a new career with communication, technology, exchanging information, and doing so with a new foundation or literally at home. So some of you, it could have been those external themes that Mars might have been integrating and affecting the fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate. Or some of you could have been seeing the opposite. So you could have been seeing changes to the home, family, property, real estate, and then that consequently shifting sort of your career, what brings you fulfillment, your neighborhood, your community, your communication, exchanging information, etc. Or for some of you, both. It might have been really crazy time. So again, take what resonates, leave the rest. And when we get to the opening square, which took place in June of 2025, this was the opening square where Mars was creating that opening square in your Leo 7th house of personal and or professional partnerships. So roughly around this time, some of you could have been taking action around the story that's unfolded. Now, again, Mars still ruling your Scorpio 10th house of career, public recognition, what brings you fulfillment. So some of you could have been taking action to create tangible results by creating business partnerships, by connecting with someone, by sorting something out within your long-term partnership or marriage, if applicable to you. So some of you could have been really taking action by literally aligning your desires and motivations with certain individuals or reaching out to certain individuals to create that action and create that change to the story playing out around this time. Now, some of you could have seen action and tangible results regarding personal and professional partnerships around this time. So it could be just a straight up direct translation with that. So either way, there could have been a little bit of stress, maybe a little bit of tension to take action regarding the situation that could have really come into consciousness around June, July, maybe even August for some of you in 2024. Then we get to the opposition where we got a little taste of that oppositional energy with Uranus in your Gemini 5th house of joy. So the Mars-Uranus opposition between your 11th and 5th, this could have really highlighted sort of your long-term goals, your motivations regarding your long-term goals, your social network. That could have been professionally related for some of you. That may have created sort of this tug of war, or feeling like you have to be in two different places at once regarding your creativity, your self-expression, what really brings you joy. So for some of you on like a very minimal level, not to minimize it because oppositions are hard and can create all sorts of situations playing out here, but some of you could have just felt that internal tug of war around what really brings you joy, your self-expression, and sort of how to balance that and align that with the long-term goals, the social network, which again could be career related for a lot of you just because Mars rules your 10th house of career, business, and public recognition. But if you know your chart and your midheaven is in the early degrees of Sagittarius, this could have doubled down or amplified the probability of it being a career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment themes in this sort of oppositional tug of war, balancing the 5th and the 11th house energy, where Mars also ruling your Aries 3rd house. Some of you could have really been focusing on, your daily communication, exchanging information, daily task, how your neighborhood, your community, sort of your immediate everyday environment is playing into this oppositional energy of like, man, where am I going? Where do I want to take this? What are my ideas? How do I integrate more joy? So again, lots of possibilities here. Now the closing square is really interesting for Aquarius risings because the closing square, as you're listening to this, most likely in February, is at 27 degrees in your Aquarius 1st house of the self, the physical body, how you take independent action, how you show up in the world. And so this closing square could be the time where Aquarius risings are sort of taking the last opportunities of action or change regarding the story that's been playing out for the past couple years. That could be heavily career, business, public recognition oriented, or things that are affecting your everyday environment, those people, places, and things within your everyday environment. that could create the tangible results to innovating or changing your living situation, renovations, relocations, relationships with family, people you live with. Again, those home, family, property, real estate themes that are still finishing up with this Uranus finalizing its transit through your Taurus fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate, where it's shaken up quite a bit for roughly the past 7 years for a lot of you. So this could definitely be sort of maybe a time where a lot of Aquarius risings are contemplating the action, maybe the tension or stress that's going to give you the get up and go to take action around the career, the business, the public recognition. But it could be home, family, property, real estate related. So some of you might really be taking action around, okay, like what is going to align my core motivations, my desire, my plan of action around what feels fulfilling to me, what really supports my overall neighborhood and community, how I want to communicate, exchange information, relate to those in my neighborhood or community, and sort of what action some of you might be taking, which could be minimal or maximal around this time, to innovate or change something around your home, family, property, and real estate that maybe supports more of what feels fulfilling to you, supports the career, the business, the public recognition that some of you might really want to be stepping into. So this could just be sort of a last minute shift around, the home, family, property, real estate themes to ultimately support your individual desires, motivation, and plan of action, with Mars literally being in your first house of self. So this could feel very personal to your motivations, personal to your desires and plan of action regarding how you want to communicate, how you want to live in your neighborhood, your community, exchange information, as well as sort of your core motivations and desires that are deeply personal to you that could be the motivational factor or fuel behind the innovation or change to have that supportive foundation for the career, the business, the public recognition, or what feels fulfilling to you for some of you around this time. Hello, Pisces risings. So this Mars-Uranus conjunction or new cycle with Mars and Uranus at 26 degrees in your Taurus third house initiated around July of 2024. So some of you can think back to that time regarding those third house themes. So maybe some of you could think back to what was going on with communication, exchanging information, technology, transportation, short distance travel. That could have been personal, but it also could be professional if you work in those fields. Now, the third house is also siblings, extended family. For some of you with your IC, if you know your natal chart and your IC is in your third house, it could have been heavily home, family, property, real estate related for some of you as well. Either way, whatever was really coming into consciousness or this new cycle that was really initiating around this time could have heavily involved financial themes because Mars rules the second house of earned income and self-worth, or it could have heavily involved ninth house themes, which could have been travel, long distance travel, higher knowledge, continuing education, spirituality, really overall growth and potential themes that could be career related for a lot of you. So again, even though this cycle was kicking off in this third house where you could have seen like siblings, extended family, your neighborhood, your community, exchanging information, transportation, themes really like come up, it really could heavily involve sort of, what was going on financially, what was going on with travel plans, higher education, continuing education, publishing, teaching, really any of those growth and potential themes that some of you could have been dealing with around this time, or could be coming up around this time, that could have been playing a part in like a sudden change in your overall motivations and desires and plan of actions around finances, around growth and potential themes that could be career related. Then we get to the opening square And the opening square took place in June of 2025, where this could have been the time that a lot of Pisces risings, you were sort of taking action around your health, wellness, vitality, or you could have been taking action around a work situation. Either way, you could have been looking at your finances, your self-worth, and sort of how that's impacting your overall health, wellness, routines, work, coworkers. But generally speaking, you know, this Mars ruling your second house of earned income and your Scorpio ninth house of those growth and potential themes that I mentioned could have been heavily involved in the action regarding a work or health matter. So some of you could have been taking action around finances to maybe take action towards, you know, more education or more travel or more growth and potential that helps align you to the work that you want to do. Some of you could have been looking at a financial situation to support your overall growth and potential that increases your overall health, wellness, and vitality. But either way, this was the opening square. So roughly around June of 2025, you know, what particular themes or situations were playing out that definitely could have impacted your routines, your daily life, your overall health, your work, that for some of you could have been a busier time. A lot of times when I see like ninth, third house situations, third, sixth house squares, it can create just a busier time because the third house is really those people, places, and things within your everyday environment. And the sixth house is like your work and health routine. So the squares with the stress, the tension, the call to action to create a tangible change. Like some of you could have just had like just a busier, more hectic time where you're trying to balance your overall routines for health, for work. That could have been, you know, involving something financially or involving something regarding those growth and potential themes. Now, the opposition took place with Uranus in your Gemini fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate. So around October, November of 2025, what was really amplifying with career, or what brings you fulfillment versus home, family, property, real estate? Now, some of you could have felt this a little earlier with Uranus retrograding in your fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate. So either way, this oppositional energy, oppositions can be tough. They can be hard to really balance and really manage. There may have been, you know, some stuff that have come up that maybe kind of makes you feel like you're being pulled in two different directions. Again, Mars rules your second house of earned income and self-worth. So some of you could have been kind of really trying to anchor yourselves in your work to support your finances, to anchor yourselves in your self-worth and your value, but also trying to balance that with the Uranus transit that was taking place in the past couple months over the summer of 2025, potentially shaking some things up or making some innovations or changes to whatever's going on with people you live with, relationships with family, property, real estate, renovations, relocations, etc. So this opposition was in angular houses. So for some of you, depending on your natal chart, it could have even created some action and change to sort of your needs versus the needs of others as well, going into the fall of 2025. Now, the closing square, which some of you listening to this in February of 2026, the closing square technically happens on February 27, 2022. Excuse me, I can't talk today, apparently. The closing square happens on February 27th, 2026, with Mars at 27 degrees. There's a lot of 27s in there for my brain to compute. So this closing square for Pisces risings is really fascinating to me because the closing square is with Mars in your Aquarius 12th house, which is the house that's hidden. It's behind the scenes. It's more private. What's going on with your mental thought patterns, where you limit yourselves, where you self-sabotage yourselves, what's going on with your mental and or physical health that could be playing into you taking action to create tangible change to whatever's closing out or what's been playing out the past couple years with this Mars-Uranus cycle. So again, Mars rules the second house of earned income and self-worth. It also rules this 9th house of growth and potential. So some of you could be taking action, behind the scenes or maybe in private or, working on mental thought patterns, taking more time alone. This Mars in the 12th, some of you quite literally taking action means sleep. Taking action means time alone. So with Mars in the 12th, taking action can be doing nothing. That's still taking action. And some of you might literally need that, really need that at this point. A lot of Pisces risings with the transits that have been going on the past couple years, especially with Pluto now in your 12th for the long haul, and Saturn being in your first the past couple years, a lot of Pisces risings, you guys have been tested and challenged, not only physically, but mentally, man. Like you've been tested for sure. And so the closing square with Mars to Uranus in your Taurus 3rd house, what's been going on mentally? What's been going on behind the scenes with you? Where do you need more rest and recharge? Where do you need more time alone? Or maybe some of you just need to take action by untangling your thoughts, untangling, your core motivations and desires behind the scenes regarding financial matters, regarding the growth and potential you really want to go after. That could be career related for some of you in 2026 moving on. But first, it's really sort of working behind the scenes in order to maybe initiate it or create a tangible reality around it in the near future. So the other thing I want to point out with this is that this closing square could also be your ability to communicate maybe what's been going on mentally or physically, or ability to communicate your overall desires and motivations around your growth and potential, your self-worth, whatever it may be, to this Uranus to help innovate and change relationships with siblings, extended family. Some of you may be actually taking action to like talk to a close sibling or a close family member, or a sibling or family member might be like able to help you take action on something too. So don't underestimate the people that are in your corner that actually can support you with this closing square. If it is a little challenging, if it is a little tense or stressful around this time. And the other thing too is that this closing square with Mars to Uranus at the end of February going into March could also be the action necessary to set the stage for this Mars-ruled area, this Aries 2nd house of earned income and self-worth, where this closing square could be setting the stage for all of this pileup that's going to happen in April, pretty much April of 2026 in your 2nd house of earned income and self-worth, where this Mars is going to initiate new cycles with Neptune, Saturn, other personal planets will be initiating new cycles here. There'll be a new moon in addition to these new cycles starting here in April of 2026. So this closing square for some of you might be the call to action to set the stage for all these new cycles really initiating, involving finances, your value system, your self-worth, and or material possessions.